"I came to bury my son," the Apache said, and every rifle in Redemption Creek stopped breathing. He walked down Main Street at high noon with his hands open at his sides, palms forward, the way a man shows he carries no blade. No rifle across his back, no knife at his hip, just a strip of red cloth tied around his upper arm and a face carved from 40 summers of wind. Dust rose around his moccasins in slow copper clouds, and the sun beat the tin roofs until they ticked like something alive. Sheriff Malachi Doone stood on the boardwalk outside the jail with his thumb hooked on his gun belt, and he did not move. He had seen 100 men come into his town wanting trouble. He had never seen one come in wanting a grave. "You take another step, Red Man, and I'll put you in the dirt myself." The voice belonged to Cyrus Belden, the cattle baron, standing outside the saloon with 3 of his riders behind him. Belden's coat was black wool despite the heat, and the silver band on his hat caught the light like a warning. His hand hovered over the walnut grip of his Colt. The Apache stopped. He was tall for his people, lean the way old rope is lean, and there was a stillness in him that made the horses at the rail twitch and pull back. He looked at Belden the way a man looks at weather he already knows is coming. "My son was hanged from your cottonwood," the Apache said. His English was slow, careful, chosen the way another man might choose bullets. 6 days ago, I have come for what is left of him." The street went quiet in a way streets do not usually go quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold. A woman with a market basket froze on the boardwalk. A boy who had been chasing a chicken let the bird go. Somewhere behind the livery, a hammer rang once against an anvil and then stopped, as though the blacksmith too had heard something in the air. Malachi Doone felt the cold slide down between his shoulder blades. 6 days ago there had been a hanging. He had not been there. He had been 3 days east chasing a rustler named McCain, and when he rode back into Redemption Creek on Sunday evening, there was a fresh mound of earth behind the church and no one who would meet his eyes about it. He had asked Cyrus Belden directly, and Belden had said, "Nothing but a horse thief, sheriff. Town business." Now the sheriff stood on his own porch with his hand near his gun and understood that his town had done something in his absence. "Whose son?" Malachi said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Speak plain." His name was Kahnu. The Apache did not look away from Belden. 16 winters. He came to this town to trade a bundle of hides for flour. He did not come to steal horses. He did not come to fight. He came because his mother is sick and there is no meat in our lodge. Lion savage. Belden spat into the dust. "Boy was caught with my brand on a mare. Chester Boyle saw it. Whole town saw it. Chester Boyle owed you $200, the Apache said quietly. "I know this because my son told me before he rode down from the ridge. He said, 'Father, I do not trust the man Boyle. He watches me like a coyote watches a rabbit.' And I said, 'Then take the hides and come home before dark.' He did not come home." A murmur moved through the crowd that had been gathering, quiet as prairie grass under wind. Chester Boyle was not on the street. Chester Boyle had left town 3 days ago, riding fast, and folks had told themselves it was just his usual drinking trip up to Ellsworth. Malachi Doone had not told himself that. Malachi Doone had wondered. "You got a name?" the sheriff said to the Apache. "Naiche." He touched his chest with 2 fingers. "Of the Chiricahua. My grandfather signed a paper with your General Howard that said we would not be killed for walking on this land. I have brought no weapon into your town. I have brought no war party. I have brought only my hands and my tongue and the promise of that paper. Paper don't mean nothing here," Belden growled. "Doone, you gonna arrest this man, or am I?" But Malachi Doone was watching Naiche's hands, and Naiche's hands were not shaking. The sheriff had learned a long time ago that a lying man's hands twitch, and an angry man's hands close into fists, and a frightened man's hands go to whatever is nearest. Naiche's hands hung open at his sides like a man waiting for a cup of water. That was not the stillness of surrender. That was the stillness of a man who had already decided how this ended and did not much mind if it ended today. "Cyrus," Malachi said, without taking his eyes off the Apache, "step back inside the saloon." "The hell I will." I said step back. There was iron in the sheriff's voice now, the kind that had not been there in a long while. Belden's riders shifted. One of them, a red-bearded man named Pike, moved his hand 2 inches closer to his own gun and then thought better of it. Malachi Doone had killed 4 men wearing this badge, and none of them had wanted to die. Naiche spoke again. and his voice carried down the street the way smoke carries. "I did not come to fight you, Sheriff. I came to say a thing, and when I have said it, every man here will know why I came unarmed." The wind kicked once, hot, and lifted the corner of the red cloth on his arm. "Speak it, then," Malachi said. Naiche looked past the sheriff, past Belden, past all the men with their hands hovering over iron. He looked at the little white church at the end of Main Street where a fresh mound of earth sat behind the fence. And he said the thing that silenced every single man in Redemption Creek. "The boy you hanged was not the boy who stole your horse." Naiche's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The boy who stole your horse, Cyrus Belden, was your own nephew. Chester Boyle knows this. That is why Chester Boyle is not here. And I have his written word inside my shirt, which I will now show, slowly, so that no man mistakes it for a knife." Malachi Doone heard someone gasp. He heard Cyrus Belden say, "That's a damn lie." But the words came out thin, the way a man's words come thin when the ground shifts under him. Naiche moved 2 fingers to the collar of his deerskin shirt, and, with the careful patience of a man defusing dynamite, drew out a folded square of paper. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, high enough for the boardwalks to see. "Sheriff," he said, "will you read it?" Malachi's boots hit the dust before he had decided to walk. Behind him, one of Belden's riders made a small sound, and the sheriff spoke without turning his head. "Anybody draws in my street," Malachi said, "I'll bury him under the same cottonwood." He took the paper from Naiche's hand. It was cheap saloon stationery, folded twice, the ink smudged where a shaky hand had blotted it. But the letters were plain enough. "I, Chester Boyle, being sober and afraid of hell, do write this. On the 4th of September, I saw Ellis Belden ride a bay mare out of his uncle's corral and up onto the ridge north. He was drunk and laughing. That night, I was paid $20 by Cyrus Belden to say the Apache boy done it. I taken the money. God forgive me. The boy was innocent. Ellis is at the Silver Fork House in Ellsworth. Chester Boyle." Malachi Doone read it twice. The second time he read it, his hand was steadier than the first. He looked up at Cyrus Belden. Belden's face had gone the color of tallow. His mouth worked once without sound. Then he found it. "That paper's forged. That Injun wrote it himself." "Chester Boyle can't write," said a voice from the boardwalk. It was Miss Ada Renfrew, who ran the post house, and every man there knew she read every letter that came through Redemption Creek and knew every hand that scratched an X in place of a name. She stepped down into the street with her chin lifted. "Chester Boyle came into my office 2 Tuesdays running and asked me to write his letters for him. He put his mark. This paper is not his hand. But this paper," she took it from Malachi's fingers with the gentleness of a woman handling a butterfly, "this is Reverend Coombs' hand. I would know it in my sleep. He must have written it out for Chester before Chester wrote." Reverend Coombs was, at that moment, standing in the doorway of the little white church at the end of the street, and he did not deny it. He only pulled his black hat down lower and stepped out into the sun and began to walk toward them, slow, like a man walking to his own hanging. Cyrus Belden's hand went to his gun. "Don't," Malachi said. "You believe this Injun over me? 22 years I've paid the taxes that keep the roof on your jail." "I believe the paper," Malachi said. "And I believe your nephew is drunk in Ellsworth right now. And I believe you knew a boy was hanged for what your own blood did. And I believe you paid to keep it quiet." The sheriff felt something break loose inside his chest, something old and rusted that he had not known was there. He had spent 20 years wearing this badge in a town that gave him meals on credit and a woman's warm smile at the door of the boarding house. And he had, more than once, looked the other way when Cyrus Belden's cattle grazed on land that was not Cyrus Belden's. He had told himself it was politics. He had told himself a sheriff kept the peace by knowing which fights to fight. A boy had died for that peace. Malachi Doone took his badge off his shirt, not to throw it down. He held it in his palm and looked at it, and then he pinned it back on, straighter than before. "Cyrus Belden," he said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Kahnu of the Chiricahua. Hand me your iron." Belden laughed. It was not a good laugh. "You got no witnesses. You got a piece of paper from a drunk and a dead Injun boy nobody in this town cared about. My riders and me could ride out of here right now, and there's not a jury west of Denver that would convict." "Maybe," Malachi said, "but you'd have to ride through me." The street tightened. Belden's 3 riders spread by half a step. Malachi did not move. Behind him, Naiche stood empty-handed and calm, and somewhere behind the livery, the blacksmith's hammer began to ring again, once, twice, steady, as though someone wanted the town to remember there was still honest work being done in it. Then the boy who had been chasing the chickens said, loud and clear the way children say things, "Mr. Sheriff, they got 2 more riders coming in from the north road." Every head turned. At the top of the rise, where the wagon road came down from the Pine Hills, 2 horsemen were moving fast, one white and one dark, kicking up a plume of dust that hung in the copper light like a warning flag. And behind them, farther out, so far you had to squint against the sun to be sure, a 3rd rider, then a 4th, then more. A column of them, coming down toward Redemption Creek at a lope that meant business. Naiche of the Chiricahua turned his head toward the sound. He did not smile. He did not need to. "My brothers," he said softly, "did not agree with me about coming unarmed." The dust column on the ridge grew a mouth of hooves. Malachi Doone counted 12 riders before he stopped counting. They came down in the loose diamond formation of men who had ridden together in raids and did not need to be told where to be. He could see the sun catch on rifle steel now, on beaded bands, on the black flag of a horse's tail. The town of Redemption Creek made a sound like one long, indrawn breath. "Doone," Belden hissed. "You let this happen. You." "Shut up, Cyrus." Malachi turned to Naiche. "You said unarmed." "I came unarmed," the Apache said. "I did not speak for my cousins. They gave me until sunset to walk out of your town alive. If I did not, they were to come and take what was left." "How long since you walked in?" Naiche looked up at the sky. "The sun says 2 hours. They're early. They love me." He said it without irony. "My brother Chato is not a patient man." Malachi Doone had 90 seconds, maybe less, to prevent a massacre. He had watched a town called Adobe Wells burn 6 years ago when a misunderstanding and a scared trigger finger had put a dozen women in graves. He would not watch it again. "Miss Ada," he said, without turning, "get every woman and child off this street. Now. Into the church, cellars, wherever. Move." Ada Renfrew was already moving. She had the boy who saw the riders by the collar and the market basket woman by the elbow, and her voice, sharp as tin, was slicing through the crowd. Doors slammed. A baby began to cry and was hushed. "Belden," Malachi said, "you and your men, into the jail. Now. You are out of your mind. They see you standing here with your gun on their kin's father, they'll ride down this street shooting everything with a hat on. You want to die today, Cyrus?" "Because I don't." Belden's face was gray now. His riders looked at him and then, more carefully, at the ridge. Pike, the red-bearded one, spoke first. "Boss, let's go inside." They went. Belden last, glaring, but he went. Malachi turned the key on the jailhouse door with his own hand, then dropped the key down the front of his shirt. He turned back to Naiche. "Walk with me. Slow. Middle of the street. Hands where they can see them. Yours also, Sheriff." Malachi held up his empty palms and stepped down off the boardwalk. The Apache fell in beside him, and together, in the ringing silence of a town that had emptied itself in 90 seconds, the 2 men walked north up Main Street toward the coming dust. The column was 200 yards out now, then 150. Malachi could see faces, dark under headbands. One man with a bone whistle at his neck, another with a Spencer carbine laid across his saddle bow. The lead rider had a scar that ran from cheekbone to jaw like a dry riverbed. That would be Chato. At 100 yards, Chato raised his hand, and the column pulled up into a wall of horses. Naiche stopped. Malachi stopped 1 step behind him. Chato looked down at his brother from the tall gray horse. He did not look at Malachi. He said something in Apache, low and hard. Naiche answered in the same tongue, and Malachi caught only one word he knew: haste. "Wait." Chato barked back, and Malachi understood the meaning even without the words. "We waited long enough. The boy is under their ground." Naiche turned to Malachi. "My brother wishes to know why my hand is empty when I stand beside the man who wears the medal of the town that killed my son." Malachi Doone had spoken to hostile riders before. He had negotiated a standoff with the McCain gang in a box canyon and walked out with 3 prisoners and no gunfire. But he had never faced 12 mounted Chiricahua with the sun behind them and a fresh grave behind him. He did what he had always done. He told the truth. "Tell your brother," he said, "that the man who ordered your nephew's death is locked in my jail. Tell him the man who lied for money has run, and I will bring him back in irons. Tell him a boy died because of white men, and white men will answer for it under white law, if he will give me the time to make it so." Naiche translated. Slowly, the words carried up the row of writers. Chato's face did not change. He said one thing, 3 syllables. "He asks," Naiche said, "how many sons?" 30. Chato spat. He says 30 sons is a long time for a mother whose son will not come to the door. Malachi swallowed. He tasted dust and copper. "Tell him," he said, "that I will ride to Ellsworth myself. Tonight, I will bring back Ellis Belden alive, and I will hang him in this street, in front of your people if you wish it, on the same cottonwood, with the same rope. On my badge." Naiche looked at him. Something moved in the old Apache's face. Not warmth, not yet, but a reweighing. "You would hang a white man for an Apache boy. I would hang a murderer for a boy." Naiche spoke to his brother. Chato listened. The wind kicked and a horse stamped, and somewhere behind them a shutter banged in a house that had emptied too fast. Then Chato lifted his rifle, and every man in that column brought his rifle up with him, 12 barrels in one motion, the sound of it like a single dry cough. Malachi's hand did not move to his gun. He had chosen already. If they shot him here, in the middle of his own street, at least Naiche might live. At least the town might have a chance to remember what a badge was supposed to mean. Naiche said one soft word. The rifles lowered. Chato leaned down from his gray horse. He looked at Malachi Doone for the first time. A long, appraising look, the way a man looks at a horse he is not sure of. Then he pointed one finger, past the sheriff, past the empty street, at the little white church and the fresh mound of earth behind it. "We take our brother home," Naiche translated. "Tonight, under the moon. No white man will stop us." "No white man will," Malachi said. Chato nodded once. Then he wheeled his horse, and the column turned as one animal and rode back up toward the ridge to wait for dark. Naiche let out a breath, so slow it seemed to have been held since sunrise. He turned to the sheriff. "You have 30 sons," he said. "And one more thing you did not promise. You have my name in your mouth now. If you break your word, I will come back into your town, and next time my hands will not be open." Redemption Creek that evening did not look like a town that had almost died. The women came back out. The blacksmith's hammer rang steady down at the livery. Somebody had lit the lamps early, and the yellow squares of window light lay soft on the dust of Main Street. But every door stayed half open. Every man walked with an ear turned toward the ridge. Malachi Doone did not eat supper. He saddled his sorrel by lantern light, packed 2 days of jerky and hardtack, a spare box of 45s, and the folded paper from Chester Boyle sealed inside an oilskin against his chest. Ada Renfrew brought him coffee in a tin cup and did not say anything about the trembling that had begun in his hands after the riders left. Naiche stood in the doorway of the livery with his arms folded. "You will ride alone?" 2 men make noise. 1 rides quiet. "Ellsworth is 3 days. 2, if I don't sleep." Naiche was silent for a moment. The lantern hissed. Somewhere out past the corral, a coyote called and another answered, and the sheriff thought of 12 horsemen waiting up in the pines under a rising moon. "Sheriff," the Apache took a step forward into the light. "I have a thing to give you. It is small, but if you show it, my people will know your face." He took from around his neck a strip of braided leather with a small object hanging at the end of it. He held it out. It was a bone whistle no longer than a man's finger, carved with 3 notches and a stylized bird's wing. The bone was smooth from years of skin. "My son wore this," Naiche said. "It was his mother's father's. If any Chiricahua stops you on the road between here and the mountains, show it and speak my name. They will not kill a man who carries Kahnu's whistle." Malachi took it. It weighed almost nothing. He turned it once in his fingers, and the notches caught the lantern light like scars. "His mother," Malachi said. "Does she know yet?" "She knows he did not come home. She has known 5 days. That is enough. When I bring his body up the trail tonight, then she will know the rest." Malachi did not know what to say. 20 years of wearing a badge, and he had never learned what to say to the mother of a boy who did not come home. He looped the whistle around his neck and tucked it under his shirt beside the oilskin. "I'm sorry, Naiche. You did not tie the rope. I wasn't here to stop it." "You have come back," the Apache said. "That is more than most." They stood a moment longer in the lantern-lit dust. Then Naiche did an unexpected thing. He reached out and laid his hand flat on the sorrel's neck and the horse, which had been fretting for the last hour, went quiet under his palm like water settling. It was the kind of gift a man could not repay. "Go," Naiche said. "The moon is up. My brother will be watching for your fire." Malachi swung up. He looked down at the old man in the deerskin shirt. "When I come back with Ellis Belden," he said, "I want your permission for something." "Speak." "The boy's grave. Behind the church. There's no marker. When this is done, with your leave, I would like to carve his name in that beam over the church door, where every man who rides through this town will see it." Naiche was quiet a long time. "Kahnu," he said finally. "It means he who watches the morning. Then that's what I'll carve." The Apache lifted his hand once, palm out, the way he had walked into town. Malachi Doone touched the brim of his hat, turned the sorrel north, and rode out of Redemption Creek under a moon so bright it silvered the sage. He rode until the town lights sank behind the ridges, and then he rode 2 hours more. When at last he stopped to breathe his horse in a wash of moonlit cottonwood, he could hear, far up in the black pines to his east, a single high note of a bone whistle. Not a warning, an acknowledgement. "I see you, Sheriff. Ride on." He rode on. 2 days he crossed dry country, sleeping in the saddle when he had to, drinking spare. On the third dawn he came down out of the low hills into the flat where Ellsworth lay, and by 7 he was tying his sorrel to the rail outside the Silver Fork boarding house. Ellis Belden was upstairs, drunk, with a woman named Lucy who took one look at Malachi's badge and stepped aside so fast she knocked over a hat rack. Ellis went for a boot pistol under his pillow. Malachi's fist got there first, and by the time Ellis Belden could see straight, his wrists were in irons and his uncle's paid boast was a small green apple pulped in his mouth. On the ride back, 3 days east, Ellis Belden talked. He talked because he had not slept, and because Malachi Doone rode behind him with a Winchester across his saddle and did not talk at all, which is a thing that unnerves a guilty man more than shouting ever will. Ellis said he had been drunk. He said the mare had been a joke. He said his uncle had come to him afterward, white with fury, and said, "We'll pin it on the engine, boy. No one'll ever ask twice." He said he had not known they would hang the boy. He said it 3 times, weeping, on the second night, and Malachi Doone said, "You knew." And Ellis Belden did not say it a 4th time. They came down into Redemption Creek at sundown on the 12th day. The whole town was out in the street. Naiche stood on the boardwalk in front of the sheriff's office with his arms folded, and beside him, cleaner and older looking than she had any right to be, stood a small Apache woman with silver braided into her hair. Kahnu's mother. She looked at the man in irons on the horse behind Malachi. She looked at Malachi Doone. Then, without a word, she stepped down into the dust and walked across the street to the little white church and stood beside the mound of fresh earth. The trial of Ellis Belden lasted 1 afternoon. Ada Renfrew read Chester Boyle's letter aloud in the packed church. Chester Boyle himself, tracked down in a Colorado mining camp by 2 of Malachi's deputized riders, sat trembling in the front pew and signed his mark before God and 30 witnesses. Ellis Belden, sober and gray and older than his 24 years, did not deny it. He said only, "I was drunk, and I let a boy die for it, and my uncle put the rope in the hands," and then he did not speak again. Cyrus Belden was tried the next morning. He did not go quiet. He shouted about property and taxes and the tin badge on Malachi Doone's chest. He said Malachi was owned by the Chiricahua. He said the town would burn without him. But Ada Renfrew read the letter again, and Chester Boyle spoke, and a boy who had been chasing a chicken on the day Naiche walked into town stood up and said, clear as a bell, that he had seen Cyrus Belden hand Chester Boyle folded bills behind the livery 3 days before the hanging. 12 jurors, all white men, all of whom had drunk Cyrus Belden's whiskey at one time or another, deliberated for 40 minutes. They came back with murder. They hanged Ellis Belden and Cyrus Belden on a Tuesday morning, from the same cottonwood, with the same rope. Malachi Doone offered the second rope to Naiche. Naiche shook his head. "It is your law," he said. "Let your hands do it." Chato watched from the ridge with 11 riders behind him. They did not come down. When the trap fell and the 2 Beldens swung, Malachi looked up at the pines, and Chato raised his rifle once, muzzle to the sky, and fired a single shot. Then the column turned and rode away, and Redemption Creek did not see them again for many years. That evening the sheriff walked to the little white church with a chisel and a mallet. The beam over the door was old pine, cracked at one end, softened by weather. Malachi Doone stood on a crate and worked by lantern light until well past midnight, and when he was done, the letters were rough but they were deep, and they would outlast the church itself. Kahnu, he who watches the morning. Below it, smaller, hanged in error, redeemed in truth. Naiche came at dawn. He stood in the dust and looked up at the beam a long time. His mouth did not move, but the corners of his eyes tightened once, hard, the way an old rope tightens under weight, and then eased. "It is a good carving," he said. "It's a start." "It is more than a start, Sheriff." Kahnu's mother had already gone home to the mountains, carrying a small bag of earth from the grave to mix with the earth of her lodge. Naiche was to follow that morning. His horse stood ready at the rail, a spotted pony with sage tied into its mane. Before he mounted, he reached beneath his shirt and drew out something wrapped in soft doeskin. He held it out to Malachi. "For you." It was a bracelet, braided horsehair and worked silver, 3 small turquoise stones set in a row. Old work, careful, the kind of piece that took a winter to make. This was Kahnu's mother's when she was a girl. She wishes it to be in your hand. She says a man who returns the dead deserves a thing that a mother has loved. Malachi Doone could not speak for a moment. He was a man who had buried a wife 12 years ago and had not, in all that time, held anything a woman had made with love in her fingers. He closed his hand around the braided horsehair and felt the small weight of the silver, and something in him that had been dry a long time went briefly wet. "Tell her," he said, "I will wear it under my shirt. Every day I wear this badge. She will know." Naiche swung up. The pony turned. Then the old Apache paused and looked down at the sheriff one last time. "You kept your word. I kept my word. Then my brothers will know your face on the road. Ride safe under any sky." He touched his heels to the pony and rode north up the wagon road, small figure in a deerskin shirt with a red cloth on his arm, until the copper haze of morning swallowed him and there was only dust settling in the ruts. Malachi Doone stood in front of the church a long time. Then he pinned Kahnu's bone whistle to the inside of his vest, next to the bracelet, next to the badge, and he turned and walked down Main Street to open the sheriff's office for another day. He walked differently now. Not prouder, not lighter, just straighter. The way a man walks when a debt he did not know he owed has been paid, and the badge on his chest means, for the first time in 20 years, exactly what it was cast to mean. Years later, when the church roof finally caved in a winter storm, the townspeople of Redemption Creek carried the old pine beam down and set it as a lintel over the new schoolhouse door, so that every child who came to learn their letters passed under the name of the Apache boy who had died for $200 and a rich man's lie. And on quiet evenings, when the wind came down off the pines, folks said you could sometimes hear, faint and clean as morning water, the single high note of a bone whistle from somewhere up in the hills, and old Sheriff Doone, sitting on his porch with a braided bracelet showing at his cuff, would tip his hat toward the sound and answer it with a small, patient smile.